Water when I'm thirsty. Drink.
What up, everybody? Welcome to another Water for the Thirsty. I'm Jared. I'm the facilitator of the conversations here, and tonight we have Lorraine, Courtney, Jerome, and Kenrick. Jerome, who's coming off a big day this week. Yeah, I'm gonna just say that. And yeah, we're here to talk a little bit about some stuff that we come across in the Word, share a little perspectives, maybe even wrestle a few ideas, share some things that inspired us based on our common reading of a Bible reading plan. Yeah, I think it's gone now. So before we came on, I was sharing a little story, and so for the benefit of Kenrick and then anybody else who might be listening, I'm gonna give some background. So yesterday I was having a conversation with a friend of mine. He wanted to know if, or what were my thoughts on the dynamic between men and women in terms of like he didn't use the word headship theology, but he was hinting towards that. He was asking about the structure and the relationship between men and women, and what I think about order, and men and women understanding not just their rules but their place. It was more their place than their rules. So he wanted to know what I thought about that. And that conversation took us to Genesis chapter 1, where we established that God created man in his image, male and female, and he gave them dominion over the earth, and there was no real apparent hierarchy of sorts there. But then he went to Genesis 2, and he suggested that in unpacking how the thing unfolded, Moses established evidence of an order and a structure, in that God created Adam by himself first, gave him some instructions, gave him a job, brought the animals to him to name them. He named them, so he kind of was giving them different names. And then he created the woman, brought the woman to him, and the fact that he was the one who named her was evidence that he now has this positional authority, like he does over the animals in his relationship with her. We had a little bit debate there. We didn't spend much time there because he quickly went to Genesis 3 in the fall, and he talked about how, the verse that says, "A desire will be unto your husband, and he will rule over you," right? And he read that, straight off in the King James Version, and leveraged that reading of it to make his interpretation and tied all of it together. So I tried to share with him that, in order to make sense of that verse, you have to look at Genesis 4, 4:7, where God is talking to Cain, right? And God says something similar to Cain about sin, right? And he said, "Yes, I remember you telling me that from before, but I did some research on it. I thought if we could read that verse, then I'll bring Kenrick in on where we are."
All right. This is Genesis 4, chapter 4, verse 7. This is King James Version. "If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him."
Well, I've been reading that in the New International Version for the longest while. So when we draw for the verse, my Bible is already set to New International, New Living, right? That's by default. Most of the other translations translate the lower half of that verse as a it, not a he, because English has male, female, and then neutral gender pronouns and verbs and things, right? However, it appears that in the Hebrew, it's a male noun, so that its literal translation is he and not it. But for English readers, he wouldn't make sense because we have a third one. So more modern Bible translators change it to it, not he. But it would literally read he, not it, because they don't have a it in that language, right?
Mhm.
When I started to have that conversation about linguistics and language, the conversation shifted into I only reading the King James Bible.
Oh, that's
Don't
yeah.
really, or the Hebrew. And right now we don't read Hebrew. Right now there is no Hebrew for us to reference. All we have is King James. And I don't really care for other interpreters unless they inspire. So he drew for his source of inspiration, which was a reading that he found from Auntie Ellen,
Mhm.
that to a casual reader could suggest, because I'm not saying that she is saying this because I didn't spend enough time with it, that the latter half of the verse is not in reference to sin, but to Abel and Cain's concern. I think it's yeah. So he suggested that it was a reference to Abel wanting to rule over him because Cain was concerned that if he didn't do right, he would lose his birthright. And he kind of walks through the verse to show that Moses establishes he was born first, Abel was born second, and that the only way to make sense of 6 and 8 is for this reading of 7, right? Which was
Oh wow.
challenging to me because it ignored all the linguistic things that are happening in verse 7, right? So I started to ask about, well, first of all, sin was lies at the door is how the King James Version has it. So I had to ask, well, what does that mean? We then dug into the language and we got the idea of crouching. It did not accept the personification of sin to be a wild beast by the crouching stance. And because the King James Version has a strong period and a capital A, the suggestion was that there's a new thought, new idea there that explains why he went to Abel and talked to him and ended up killing him.
So sin. So I may be way off. So sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. He's interpreting that as being able.
So that's great for that version that you're reading. You're
I'm
probably
sorry,
reading
that
the
was
New Living
NLT. Yeah, yeah,
Translation.
yeah.
Yeah. He was reading the King James Version. The King James Version reads similarly, but different. Right? It reads,
Sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him.
yes, and to thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And the he's that are being translated there has to be a person and only
From
could
his
make,
perspective.
yes, and could
Yes.
only
Okay.
make sense as being able.
I got you.
So one of the challenges I had was why would Abel be trying to rule over
Correct.
Cain? but the argument came back. That's what the inspiration seemed to suggest, right? One of the reasons I'm raising this is not so much to debate um, the the logic so much as to say it brought out to me the importance of proper Bible study techniques, understandings, and principles in having any kind of conversation. Because when you have scriptural conversations without those guardrails, people can come up with all kinds of understandings, and it's difficult to, I would say, reason because we're not accepting the same kinds of standards. And I brought it up in this forum because I am it it affirmed for me the value of having those things in place because it allows for when you do have those divergent views a way of coming to understanding, right? It's agreed, um, because one of the things he said is I don't trust any of them other Bibles. I don't trust any modern translation. So King James, right? And I'm not
Because it was because of what?
because it was good enough for all the preachers that he follows,
Yeah.
uh, and that's the one he knows and is comfortable with and feels safe with. Um, so, and I'm not here to debate that.
I'm with you. Yeah,
idea.
yeah, yeah.
I'm just saying that when you come to that idea, there's another level down below that suggests that you don't, that there's another level below that we have to acknowledge about the nature of language and translations and the value of multiple voices in the space in order to understand what's being said because of the nature of language. And if we don't appreciate that, it's difficult to have conversations, right? And that's a number one Bible study principle. Understanding the nature of languages, and the role that that plays in making sense of what's being said. Um, and I think that gives us, in this space, a whole lot of advantage when we have divergent ideas. Because now we are seeking to understand what is actually being said before we try to establish meaning.
And then, so let me ask this also in relation to this. I guess 100% language, but there's like so many different areas that are important as well. I was just looking up when certain things were written or published, certain versions were published, right? And it also goes to, I mean, I guess I could see both sides, but also goes to culture, time, you know, all of those different things. If you're, King James Version was originally published in 1611. NIV was originally published in 1973, right? That's a lot's gone on between. You would read King James Version under a completely different lens, or with a completely different lens, in 1611 than you would in 1973, and and so it's like all of that's important as well. Not that. Oh my gosh. Maybe that was the Lord telling me to be quiet.
No,
Maybe,
probably
maybe,
not.
maybe we should stick with 1611. Maybe that's what it is.
No, but you were making a valid point, which
No,
I
so
would
I mean,
like you to continue with.
no, no, no. I was just no. That's all I had to say. So I think all of that. I think you know. So I guess the debate is, or the not debate, but the question is, God doesn't change, but is there a role for? I don't know if it's clarification, if it's understanding it as things progress, you know, do do um, do certain words expand? I don't know. I understand. I understand what he's saying under the guys that you know this was established. It was it. You know, if it's good for that, why change it? But I also believe in I think people evolve as well. Societies evolve, languages evolve. I do believe in evolution.
Here's the other piece of that struck me that I don't know that we acknowledge, and it may be a Western world thing. I wouldn't just say American, but I would say Western. It's the primacy of English as being the predominant, preeminent understanding of scripture that
Of
is built into
of
the whole
of anything.
that's built into the whole King James only idea. Because as you point out, 1611,
Correct.
before that, the only other English Bible was one produced by a guy named John Tyndale.
Hmm.
He didn't even finish the translation because they lynched him for being a heretic for trying to put it into English,
Okay, right?
right? And so there's more weight put into a translation in English than there is to what the original source material actually said in the original language. And I think that is also, as Bible students, something we need to be aware of in terms of our own bias for our own language. And assuming that the version that we have in our language is even right
And
as a
and
source
so,
of truth.
and so let me ask this. So are Bibles in other languages translated off of the KJV,
No,
or are they translated off of the
translation
Hebrew
of the Hebrew and the Greek.
and the Greek?
It
Okay.
would be problematic to translate off a translation because you wouldn't get the actual translation, particularly since there's so many ideas that are not clear in the original that might be, and well, I would even say for languages like English and Spanish, and this is one of the things I was saying before we came on. Well, like Spanish and French, there isn't a it.
Correct.
They don't have neutral.
Correct. Which is one of the things that they're actually fighting with now.
What do
There.
you mean?
Well, well, gender. I mean, outside this conversation, but just gender awareness, right?
Right.
With the conversations in society, like there's only two. There's not multiple,
And there's
right?
no neutral. It's either
And
male
there's
or female.
and there's not multiple for the purpose like society now. But then there's correct. There's no neutral either. There's not an it, and so there's always been this debate there. After talking to a couple people, that how do you acknowledge that?
Right. So when you're reading something in Hebrew and the Hebrew says he to refer to an inanimate object, how do you then read that in English? And if a translator then says he's referring to an inanimate object, in our language, we wouldn't refer to that as an he, we would refer to that as an it. So I translate it as an it, but your preferred language says he. Now you're changing the original is in your mind as opposed to refining the idea to the way you speak in your language right now. And so
Correct.
I think those basic principles are fundamental, I think, to having any conversation. And they were reaffirmed for me last night. I just wanted to share that experience with you
Who was the
guys.
guy you were talking to? Oh,
As a
you didn't give it.
partner of mine, and he was, so I didn't
Oh,
want to put him out there
oh.
until
I,
he decided to put himself out there like that. I asked
okay.
him to join us, but I don't know if he got my message because I didn't ask him till late.
Jeremiah was texting me. I wasn't sure if that was him.
Nah, it wasn't Jeremiah.
Okay.
But I guess the question I wanted to ask you guys coming out of our conversation is, could you make a case for hierarchy in male-female relationships from the scripture? Because that's where he was trying to go. And I was just curious as to your thoughts on that. Because that's where we started. We didn't really finish there because we got lost in the sin and the lion, the sin crouching and the Abel and the birthright. We got lost in there, so we never really settled the plane on the first issue. But I was curious as to your thoughts on it. Could you make a case for hierarchy
Yes.
from the scripture?
Yes.
And
Depending
I
on
want
how
to
you
distinguish hierarchy
define.
from responsibility, which is to me different. But
Well, that's what I was about to say.
hierarchy
Depending on how
from
you define hierarchy. So if it's more
okay.
of a roles, responsibilities, functions, yes, you can.
Tell me more.
Um,
I'd be interested in seeing hearing that.
so there's Adam is male and female, right? God calls them Adam. Adam then called her Eve. And part of Eve's function is to nurture and germinate any seed of a man, uh, multiply it. Which is why if you have a male and female in the right sort of relationship, you see where the woman almost naturally will nurture and multiply any seed that she's given, not just a physical seed. Um, what is an interesting example for is when you look at like Mary and Joseph. God goes to Mary and says, "All right, my Holy Spirit's going to roll up on you." And well, what? Right. He then goes to Joseph and basically tells Joseph the same thing. Now he's doing that to keep Joseph from, how does the Bible put it?
Putting her aside.
Privily. Yeah. You will notice thereafter, though, he never talks to Mary again. It's not recorded that he speaks to Mary again about the whole thing. The conversations are with Joseph. So it seems like he's letting Mary know, Mary, I am with you. I got you. And I'm with Joseph. He goes to Joseph and says, Joseph, I'm with you. I got you. I'm with Mary. And then the direction, the guidance, the vision going forward goes to Joseph. And Mary's tapped into, all right, this guy is locked in with God. So if he says, I've just had a baby, I'm still, with all the back pains, the aches, or whatever, but we're going to go 700 miles to Egypt. Okay. She maintains the same posture with him that she does with God. When God comes to her, she's like, be it unto me as you will. Joseph is like 700 miles in your, freshly dropped a baby state, be it unto me as you will. And in the right relationships in the Bible, and I'm saying right, not necessarily because they started right. Enter David and what's her name?
Bathsheba.
Bathsheba. But when they became right in function, i.e., they got into their roles, you always see that dynamic where the man could bring a vision, the woman will nurture and multiply it. The man could bring whatever it is. And even now, for example, when they look at 74, I'll localize it to African community, American community, right? 74% of African American homes are single parent homes. It's usually single mother. 83% of all truancy, gang activity, whatnot, where kids get into truancy, get into gang activity, etc., come from those homes. And what they're saying is while mothers are exceptional at helping the child understand self and their emotions, what is lacking, especially when the kid gets to 7, is discipline. And they're realizing that between 7 and 9, that's when kids, male kids in particular, start going outside of the home looking for some sort of father figure in a disciplinary role. Unfortunately, that's where they usually get hooked up with the gang dealers, drug dealers, whatever, and we know how that goes. But there's this expectation that there's roles and functions for the different sexes. It's not that one is better than the other.
It's just like the discussion Jesus had with the roles and functions for the different members of the body, right? Where he says, the hand can't say to the leg, "But I don't need you because you don't do what I do." The leg can't say to the eye, "Well, I don't need you because I don't, because you don't do what I do." There's distinct roles and functions. When you walk in that function, things tend to move swimmingly well, and when you don't, but the role and function isn't what modern society tries to make it. Well, the man should go out and earn all the money, and the woman should stay home and raise the kids and wash dishes and nonsense like that, right? But biblically, you see that there's a distinction in, like I said, roles and functions.
How much of that role and function you're describing there is cultural, as we look at it in the Bible, and how much of that is preordained or established by God as the way it should be, and can we separate the two, or is it neatly intertwined?
I think you can. I think what is defined in the Bible is actually very narrow, and in different societal contexts, people add things on. But yeah, I think you can. They're not as neatly intertwined as people would like. Um, and again, I think what the Bible, because the Bible in true fashion tends to give you guidelines and objectives, and it's not going to always get into very granular prescriptive things. I think that's where people tend to put their own flavor on, if you want to call it that.
What then, before I take Henry, because I think his mind is going there, what do you do with the appearance that the gospel seeks to flatten societal constructs and decentralize authority? What do you do with that idea in the marriage relationship or the man-woman dynamic?
I don't. I think it's, to your point, it's a societal construct, yes, that you're trying to flatten. And again, because I think at the time, this there was a pervasive mindset that X was better than Y. Men are better than women, or if you're from the tribe of whatever Levi, you're better than. And if you, and what God is trying to say, you're equals, but for you to succeed, to have fulfillment, success, and peace as I have designed you to as a people, you need to know your role and function in it. If you're not functioning in your role, it doesn't. It kind of all goes to crap. And I think that's what you're seeing now when nobody wants to function in their role. Bosses don't understand what it means to be a leader. Yeah, let me say that people want to be bosses, they don't want to be leaders. You can spit it however you like. People just don't want to function in their roles, and then everything is just going crazy. But I think that what the Gospels were trying to do was to get it out of people's head that something that you either born with naturally or natively, or something that you've been given by virtue of a position, somehow makes you better and more entitled than other people. It doesn't do away with the fact that you have a specific function.
So what I'm hearing is not really hierarchy, but function and rules, which I can completely rock with.
Right.
For example, on a basketball team, uh, a team captain is a function. It's not a hierarchical position over the rest of the team. You are a team member just like I am, right? But you have a role, a responsibility, um, and accountability for regarding the rest of us. But
It also
it's different from a coach, right, or a general manager.
because the general manager or CEO has that final say.
Correct.
You may not always agree, and I think that is another thing we have to look at, where people think consensus means agreement. Sometimes consensus is I have voiced my concerns, even my objections. I will still put my all behind the decision that's taken. even if I don't believe it's the best one. And you see that all the time in the corporate culture where we have a board meeting or whatever, and whoever chairman of the board, or if it's like I said, the CEO has the final say. And me as COO and you as CFO and whatever, we might give our our 2 cents, but we know at the end of the day, final says with that dude. He's the one who will have to answer to the stock market and the board. And so, yeah, that really is kind of more role and function. We like to think of it in just a hierarchical way, but it really is a because he's in the hot seat, right? If his decision is bad, he's the one getting fired, not he. So
Yeah. I will agree that there's a responsibility, and I see it when you were talking about Joseph, right? And I see it even when God comes in the garden and talks to Adam. You know, I see it when God in flattening out the structure of the children of Israel and not giving them a king, and he arranges the people by the family so that there's an accountable person, a representative for the group.
right,
But a representative for the group is not necessarily the person in charge of the group, right? Almost like in a similar vein where, and I'm using this very poor example, but it's one that I hope kind of illustrates my point. As the elder brother to my sister, I don't have direction to punish, to chastise, to any of those things. But I do have a responsibility to ensure that she's aware of all that's supposed to be happening, and I try to course correct her when she's going off. But that's kind of where my responsibility ends, right? More of a team captain role than a team owner role.
yeah. You remember we kind of got into this when we were talking about how even in a church context, we lose sight of that fact where it was very clear our role was to go into all the world, preach the gospel, preach it by your life firstly, how you live, how you interact with people. If they be converted, baptize them. But we kind of think, the whole conversion thing is part of our task, and we run out there and we drag people kicking and screaming to the pulpit, pour whatever on them and sprinkle pixie dust and all that. It's like, okay, you will be changed, healed, and everything in between. When it's not your role. And you're actually, what is scary is that you are actually then potentially interfering with the work of God in people's lives because you're acting outside of your role.
I want to welcome Cliff and Rondell to our conversation. Appreciate you guys joining us. Cliff is, regular. Rondell for stepping in. I was kind of sharing with them a little bit of the conversation we was having yesterday, but now I could tell them who I was talking about because at first he didn't have a name. He didn't have a name. There was no partner.
You know him.
But yeah, so right now I just threw out to them in reflection on our conversation if they could make a case for a hierarchy out of the scripture. Just kind of seeing where they were. Before I take you, I wanted to hear what Kenrick was thinking.
So I don't really engage in these conversations because of Genesis. Was it Genesis 3? I was looking at it just now, 3:16, 17, something like that. And
3:16.
we're all gonna have this conversation. Like it's always gonna be like it was pretty clear. I will sharpen the pain for you. Sorry, I'm using NLT for Jeremiah. I will sharpen the pain for you, pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth. And you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. And I was looking up rule and control and all that, and it's what you think it is. And so at the beginning, immediately after sin, this was already established. Like we could debate what rule is and all that kind of stuff and what it should be, and
Can I get
but
you to define establish as you continue, but just so I'm following where you are. What do you mean?
established,
Yeah, what do you mean by
it was
establish?
it was told by God to them. Like it was told. This was then he
Law.
said to the woman, I will sharpen your pain and your desire and you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you.
So I guess let me refine my question then. Is it
Are you saying go
established
ahead?
from a standpoint of um, this is how I want it to be, or established from a standpoint of this is what's going to happen?
This is yeah. This is it. I don't think he wanted to be, but this was the result of. And so I think that I do understand. I do see what you're saying about the flattening of the flattening of the organization. I do see the flattening of roles and responsibilities and whatnot that you were talking about. At least the idea of it, right? But I guess my thing is that no matter what happened, whether the whatever our I guess God's intent, I think there's naturally going to be this push and pull that occurs, and so kind of is what it is.
Yeah, so I guess I put up Shari's question, which was where I was going. Is God telling them what would happen or establishing it and saying, this is what I'm establishing now and setting up to be? Um,
I
I don't
I
know
don't
what
think
I'm saying.
Digital
What
language.
you
the
would
fact that
establish.
the fact that this wasn't prescriptive prior to sin. I think this was him saying this is the way it is now. Like he's like, this is what's going to happen.
This is going to be a result of, or
This is
using
going to be a
Shari's
result
word, this is the result.
of what you just did.
Right, which again doesn't mean it's prescriptive. It's him describing. So it's like we have this thing even in our local law that says, how does it go, Jared? Ignorance of the law. Basically, you being ignorant of a law doesn't like excuse you from the
Excuse me
penalty,
from
right?
yeah.
So even if you don't know that you're driving in a 65 zone and you're in a you're at 70 in a 65 zone, you're still gonna get a ticket. And me describing to you, now that I've caught you doing 80, or in my case probably 100, 150 in a 65 zone, um, and telling you, well, here's the ticket, here's when to do all of those things. I am describing to you what the outcome, the repercussion of your action is. It doesn't mean that I'm prescribing this is what I want it to be, this is the way it should be. This is just me telling you this is how it's going to go down now that you've reached this.
You weren't the first.
You what?
What?
You wouldn't have been the first. The reason
Whoever
why
was,
the reason why
right,
it
but whoever
carries
was the
weight
first
is
is going to
because
get
these
the
bad ones
message,
are the
and then it's going
first.
to.
Was that
I said, whoever was the first, there was always that first person, right? And I'm sure
correct?
there have been times like when they adjusted the speed limit, I'm sure I was probably the first guy. So yeah,
Correct, but it was already established, right?
right. But do
What
remember,
did you what was
do
the phrase
remember,
you just used? What was the
hold
phrase you
on,
just used?
do remember, sin didn't start in the garden,
Was
and
that
there were
again?
consequences for sin. Didn't start in the garden. There were consequences for sin and repercussions for sin, established since it started in heaven.
But this is what but this is
And now
the
all Jesus is doing is narrowing down and saying, remember those, because remember Jesus used to come into the garden and sit with Adam and Eve and give them the whole lecture and the whole 9 yards, right? Counsel with them and all of that. Now that they've actually done it, he's like, this is how these repercussions intimately affect you going forward. But in a broad sense, they always knew that, crap will hit the fan if we didn't do what he, if he, if we did what he told us not to do, or we didn't do what he told us to do. Now he's just like being a little more specific.
yeah, he's defining crap,
And
right?
how
And
that
one
crap is
and
done,
one
yeah.
of and one of and part of crapitus is this.
But again, I don't see that
Part
as
of
him
what,
saying this
Dennis?
is how I wanted it to be.
Crapitus?
Crevices.
Let me take these two thoughts from Sean, and then another one that came in from Shari. This is what's going to happen because of sin, is what Sean is saying. Most scholars alluded this to be the first given prophecy. He then also wishes you all a happy Sabbath. But then Shari goes on and says, I think it's sad that we just accept the result of sin conveniently from the gender that is on top, and don't look to God to counteract the effect of sin in our relationships. We are complacent with this result of sin, but not others like our, hold on, I'm not typed more and it's not showing up. Hold on.
But not others like our personal salvation.
Personal salvation. All right, thank you.
But not. Hold on, keep it up. I read slow. But not others like our. I don't. What do you mean, not others?
Not other matters.
Oh, no other. Oh, okay. I got you. Okay.
And she goes on to say, we talk about the state of men and women, and we are just like it is what it is. But when we're talking about our salvation, we are like, God, fix it, please. Actually, I would say that is true. I don't know that that's where we are today. I think.
Yeah, I'm not saying don't fix it. You know, I think my relationship with my wife is a very healthy relationship where I only exert dominion in the bedroom, and but every other aspect in life, I think is very much a shared responsibility. And so, but I'm just saying that the result of was the fact that this will always be something that comes up.
She don't boss you around for your birthday?
Well,
sorry.
And he gives us his car in that position.
No, but I'm with you, Kenrick. I'm with you. Yeah. So, Rondell, talk to me.
Me?
Yeah.
I'm still listening to the conversation. I'm listening, as you know. I'm just listening for now, if you don't mind.
You're priming up. You're priming up.
All right. Let me put it this way, right? So Jai, told you you're having a conversation, right? Yeah?
Yeah.
You told them what the conversation was about, right?
Yeah, I told them where we started and where we ended up. Yes. We didn't resolve this issue. We got stuck in another one, but yes, I gave them that whole thing.
oh, this is Jeremiah?
Yes.
yeah, where are you going, Kendrick? Oh my. Let me see if everybody on the same page here with me. Everybody, I believe on LNG writings. Anybody? Everybody?
I believe she wrote. I believe she wrote.
Do you believe she wrote? Do you believe anything that she says? Because I come from old school. I from the old school. I draw most of my beliefs and my thoughts and my ideas. I don't really identify too much with the modernists. You know, I do the King James version and I do the LNGY. You know,
right?
And that's what I do. Full stop. Right. I kind of wary of these new, as I was telling Jaren, a little wary about the new versions because within the last few hundred years, a lot of new versions came up. You know what I mean? We don't know who are the people behind these new versions. Sometimes things can change that affect the whole meaning of a whole verse, the whole meaning of a scripture. So for
me, just take a whole verse out.
Or they take out exactly, Jerry. Right? So I just very wary. So what I do to safeguard myself, right, and my belief system, and to safeguard me going off course, I stick with what I know, men like E. Cleveland, men like C.D. Brooks, men like, those stalwarts of the times past, what they prescribe, I kind of, all right, I kind of feel a little more comfortable. That's why I go hardcore King James. No, that don't say that I have an issue with any other, we call it, version or whatever. So I put you guys on this one time. I from the old school, right? So let's start there. So according to it's a thing that my mother used to tell me a long time. She used to tell me, there's order in heaven. There's order in heaven. She saw some of that. There's order in heaven. So I never used to go on with this nonsense. Let me like order in heaven. But then years after I thought about it, and after hearing different people speak, what she was trying to tell me was that in heaven, right, there's hierarchical arrangements. So she is saying that there isn't nothing intrinsically wrong with having a hierarchical arrangement, because in heaven, Lucifer was the covering angel at the point he says to instructions to other angels, and other angels used to pass it on to other angels, etc. Right? They receive it from God, they pass and they pass down the lines, and the command spread out to wherever they need to go. Right? Even in heaven, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, three of them is one. Right? But there's a hierarchical relationship, but yet, as you know, the Godhead is a complicated explanation. Even though there's a hierarchical relationship, all is God, all have the same power, etc., etc. So we taking a pattern from heaven that God, when God created, He also, within creation, there was laws. The law of gravity, the law of this, the law of that, the seasons, night and day, all of these things were part of the creation process. So there's order. And everything that God has done, there's order. When He came on, He decided that He created this family on the earth, right? He started off with a structure. And the structure was, He created, of course, we know there were 6 days of creation and then the Sabbath, etc. But within the 6 days, He made man first. He didn't make woman and man together. He is God, He cannot do two of them together. He made man first. I'm not saying that means anything significant, but let me just start there. As Jared and I was reading last night, he made man first. Then, at that point in time, He could have bring the woman, but He still didn't bring the woman yet. He went on and He created. What He did again, boy? Oh, He bring all the animals, right, for Adam to name them, etc., etc. Which Adam did. He named every one of them and go say, right, I like that, I like they call this zebra, I like they call this. Right? So God sanctioned it. Then, before that, God said, you know what, it's not good that man should be alone. Right? Let me bring in the woman now into the whole picture. Right? So God caused her sleep, as we know the story, how it went. He caused her sleep to fall upon Adam. He cut her rib, make a woman, bring she to him. Right? When he brought her to him, he said, Adam said, this is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Adam went on to name Eve, woman. He went on to name her now. The same way he named all the animals. And that's calling Eve an animal. But the same way he named, that was a form of dominion. Right? That was a form of dominion. That was a form of control. He gave Adam this power. That's what I'm saying. And then when he made Eve, after Adam, brought her to Adam, Adam said, okay, this we'll call her woman. Wait. So for me, that was a form of establishing a hierarchical relationship right there before sin. So let me start there. Right? So the same way there's order in heaven. God issues instructions, pass it on to the covering angel pass it on to everybody else. It's the same way when God came after the fall of man. No, next now. Man fell, um, Satan tempted Eve and she fell. He didn't come at the man, he came at the woman. When all of that went down, and God come in the garden, walking through in the cool of the night, at the day, he ain't called for Eve. He called for Adam. He say, Adam, where art thou? He can address Eve, he can say, Eve, where are you? He say, Adam. Notice how everything, notice the hierarchical arrangement going on with God. He dealing with the man. And like I was telling, as I'm warning everybody, I old school. I into this sort of that modern madness that going on. I keeping it how I see it. So from Genesis to Revelation, I never hear a woman priest there yet. Right? From Genesis to Revelation. And if you notice, as I still enjoy it, in all the genealogies, some of this, some of that, I ain't see no thought going on the road. So I'm not saying anything significant about that, but all of these are cues for the intelligent to think. If there's an order going on, and why it is God always, even in the book of Job, and God says, "Put up your loins like a man and talk to me, Job. Put up your loins like a man." And that's all I have to say. We can deduce, we can have, or we can continue conversation on there and take it further. But that's the foundation I lay in terms of the fact that from the beginning, God created Adam first. He gave Adam a work. He said, Adam, name all these animals running here. Things was going on. Then God went and he made one, and he brought the woman to Adam. And Adam is the one who called her woman. He gave her a name, and they went on from there. When was time and sin had come into the world, the devil used her as his entrance point. Adam was there, he could have gone through Adam, but according to Eve, why he knew why he took that angle, because he would not have been successful if it was the man. So not after the fall now, God reiterated it in a more, I wouldn't want to use the word sinister way, but he reiterated that, you know what, that the desire shall be towards one and shall rule over it. Plain talk, bad man. So now we don't have inference. It was expressly said, I don't care what version I'll bring, change that fact. That is what I say. That is what's going on with my grade.
So just a couple of notes. Verse 23 of Genesis 2 says, she shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. What's actually happening there is he calls her female man and doesn't give her a name. He doesn't actually give her a name until the next chapter, chapter 3, verse 30, where Adam names his wife Eve. And he doesn't name his wife Eve until after sin. So I just want to point that out. When he referred to her as woman, if we go to the language that's there, it is just the female version of Adam. It's Adamah versus Adam. So it's Adam, she's Adamah. And it was a note that she's me, but she's female me. So it's just it was not a naming in that sense. It was not a naming, but he referred to her as female Adam. And that's how the language describes it. The naming doesn't happen. He gives her a name. He does give her a name. He calls her Eve. Eve is her name. And that happens in the next chapter, chapter 3, verse 20. But I just wanted to make that distinction there before we dive in any further.
So what is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh and all that? There.
Yeah, that's exactly that. Because she came out of me, she is like me, man, human, but she's female human. So it's Adam, Adamah. It's more of just acknowledging that she's part of me.
So it's
yeah. All right. So what after God bring her from wherever He created her and bring her to Him. And what is it? The fact that prior to that, God brought all the animals the same way to Him that He could name
Right.
them.
All I'm saying is, in that instance, He did not name her. He does name her. He names her later. So that's all I'm saying. According to what's written in the scripture, He doesn't name her at this point. He gives her a name in chapter 3, verse 20. Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all living. So, to your point, He does give her a name. He doesn't name her until after sin. And when what you are referring to, He's not giving her a name, but describing what she is.
I would say that He was giving her a name, but He called her woman. You know what I mean? That's the
He was
first time the
describing.
woman was coined. You know what I mean? In the Bible.
Now,
That's the first time the word woman was coined.
so let's do this, Rondell. Woman is an English rendering of a Hebrew word that is the same word. One is masculine, one is feminine. That means the same thing in terms of the idea, female human. That's literally what the word means, female human. He referred to her as female human because she was taken out of him.
What's the significance of that, Jared? You tell me the significance of that point.
The significance is written in what he says. This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. He's a rib that's taken out of him. She's not a new being. She's an extension of him. She's not just an extension of him. It's almost like she came out of him and was formed out of him. So she's part of him. She is him. They share the same flesh. She's not a new thing. She's an extension. And he's just describing her as being that extension and making the significance of she's not something separate to me. She's a part of me. She and I are one in that regard because she's coming out of me. That's all that's being stated there.
Okay.
Later on, he goes on and gives her a name, but not in that moment.
Okay. But what is the significance of that? She came out of him and all of these things. What is the significance of that?
It goes on to say they are one flesh. They are together. They are now one. They are two that are actually one because it's one that was divided into two, so to speak. It's not now two separate beings. It's one being that was split into two. And now they have two different roles, two different functions. It's one humanity, one human in terms of what they actually are human, but there are two parts to it.
Okay, so
the male part and the female part make one part.
They're from the same human race, right? That's what you're trying to say.
Not just the same human race. It's not just it is the human race, but it's more than just the human race. They are now. It's like a pair of shoes has a left shoe and a right shoe, right? So this is now a part of the pair. It's a pair of shoes.
Right.
It's the left shoe and the right shoe. So it's almost like he's saying, God made the left shoe, then took the lacings from the left shoe, made a right shoe, brought it to, and he says, you are now right shoe.
All right, so what have I the significance that I was is that when God brought her to him, she can say that, hey, he is now, I mean, he's man of, he come from me, or whatever the case might be. She can say that, but what I'm saying, the act of him doing the speaking and doing the pronunciation and saying whatever woman kindness or whatever they decided to describe it as, he was the one making that pronunciation.
Yes, point in time. He was the one making the statement.
Right.
He was the one making the statement.
And likewise, he was also the one prior to that naming the animals. So it seemed like he had a role in all of these different aspects. So for me, that's the point that I'm putting up. You know what I mean? Whatever woman kindness, whether it be from same kind or different kind, or you know, I mean, I don't want to get into that technicalities at this point.
There's a piece that's missing that's in the scripture as well That's not just tied to the naming, because in this instance, he's not naming. He's just describing what she is. But you'll
Right,
also notice
but
that,
she could have done.
yes, she could have done it. He's
Right.
doing it. But notice what's also happening in the scripture. God makes the man by himself, and he comments about the need of the man to have something else. The man has the experience to become aware that he's by himself and has this awareness of this need. So when he comes and he brings the man, the woman, God brings the woman to him, he's the one making that awareness, because he knows an experience where she's not a part of me. So he would comment about it, because as the writer is walking through it, he's walking through God bringing awareness to the man of his need for this other thing. God makes the comment and then takes him through the exercise of discovering it for himself. When he goes through the naming of the animals, he realizes everybody else have a pair except me. Right? So when he brings the woman now, he now goes, aha, I see what you're doing, God, here. This is now me. This is now me. I have this appreciation. The woman doesn't have that appreciation, because all she knows since she born or make is Adam. Adam is the one who now has that appreciation, so he could make that statement. Now, I don't agree with you that he does name her, and that may have significance. I'm just saying, in this space, in this moment, that's not what's taking place.
Right, but in this space, in this moment, he was the one speaking. But anyway, go ahead. Let me get somebody else.
He was the one speaking, yes.
Because, okay, even when you look in the book of Job, when that whole thing happened with Job, notice the senior men were the ones speaking, right? And the juniors sat quietly, because that is the way, that's the order in which it went. So the fact that in this circumstance that he was able to speak, he spoke instead of her, I think that had some kind of significance.
So Rhonda, you're breaking up. I don't know if you could get on a Wi-Fi or whatnot, because your audio is going in and out. It's not very clear.
Okay.
The other thing is, just because he's the only one who's recorded to speak doesn't mean that there's not other conversation that took place. And I'm not saying there is or there isn't, but you can't say because only he is recorded to have spoken that there's significance there, because we don't know what other conversation took place. Because Moses is writing to make a point, and he goes on to make his points. That is why Moses is, and you have to keep in mind what Moses is doing. Moses is trying to catch people up as to what took place, right? He's trying to describe how these whole events came about, and he's actually leading up to what God is doing and how we got to where we are now, right? So he's recapping in that regard. So Moses is making a point in delivering the information that he delivered. And I can't say that we could infer necessarily, because Moses doesn't include any other conversation, that no other conversation took place. That would be a leap and a stretch.
Yeah, but
a reasonable one, but not one that we could actually put any kind of real stock in.
Jared, I think though based on what we were saying when Rondell came in, I feel like we actually on the same page, even if we're in different paragraphs.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing, but go ahead.
Right, because fundamentally, Rondell keeps alluding to the fact that there's an order, there's their rules and their functions, which I think is where we all ended. I think, at least where
we ended on rules and functions. Yes,
rules and functions. How we choose to label that, if we want to use the word hierarchy or something, is one thing. But I think definitely, and to Rondell's point, part of the reason we have madness in the world right now is because people aren't playing their role.
Correct.
That's absolutely.
You use the basketball analogy or football. I mean, it's like a simple one, since I have a propensity for speed. You always have a driver and a navigator. The minute the navigator starts trying to do the driving and whatnot, I'm sure you've all been in situations where you had a passenger or a backseat driver, right? There's a close family friend of ours where if she's next to you when you're driving and she thinks you're going to pull on a vehicle, she will try to jump over. Old lady, she'll try to jump over and pull the steering wheel from you. it's like you're guaranteeing gonna crash, right? Because your role is to be the passenger, my role is to drive. So I'm not gonna get into the whole. I don't know if we should get into the hierarchy thing, but definitely there are distinct roles and functions, and when you play to those roles, you know things move the way they should, and when you
But
don't,
like, oh,
and it's funny on that subject. I saw Sean posted. Hi, Sean. Posted Adventist Home, chapter 13, paragraph 2, which you could get to after. But that's going to be a powder keg.
I didn't
On
know
the
where to
subject
find
of
that.
roles and
I'm glad
functions.
I'm glad you had that reference because I didn't know where to find that. But we could get into it.
Cliff was going to say something.
Yeah. Hold on, Cliff. Let me just pull this in. You
Sure.
can say that Eve and Adam are living representations of the nature of Son of God, God and His Son. That's a very interesting thought there. God and His Son, Adam and Eve. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. She's the womb of man, Miss Sharon says. All right, Cliff, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think we were like Jerry said, we were kind of on the same page and kind of talking about the same thing. I just my way of understanding some things. I think you were kind of going towards it, Jared, when you were explaining it, because I see the whole scenario playing out like that. Is that God created us. Let us make man in our own image. Man being Adam, you know, containing everything in a sense that God has, the essence of who he is. But when he created woman, and I'm using the terms loosely, he pulled out of Adam himself and made a completely different being that was autonomous but yet connected. But the symbiosis occurred because God was at the center, allowing them to understand each other as one. Adam knew everything. She only knew what like you alluded to. She only knew of being when she came about. But because God was there, there was a symbiosis. When sin entered, it cut that symbiosis. So now you have two distinct beings understanding life in two different ways with the missing piece. So on this side of sin, there's hierarchy because God can only restore partially that symbiosis because sin is always present, keeping us from connecting it fully. And until we are fully redeemed and understand our oneness as God is one, Father, Son, and Spirit, all being in one, we're made like that, but we're separated and there's no symbiosis. God is there. He can help us. Like Henrik said, hey, we can have a great marriage. We can understand each other. We can start to work together, but it's only so close we're going to be able to get because there's a wedge there. Sin. And because of that, there has to be a hierarchy. When I have little kids, and if God comes in the little kid, he's coming to me and saying, what have you done with the kids I gave you? He's not going to my wife. He's going to be like, what have you done? Because it's your responsibility to make sure that you lead them. You know what I'm saying?
Now, hear what you're saying. So I want to ask a question based on what you're saying. Is there a difference between responsibility or relationship between responsibility and hierarchy? Are they one and the same? Are they different? Are they related in some ways?
You say the difference between relationship and responsibility.
Yeah, difference or relationship between responsibility and hierarchy. If I have a responsibility, does that automatically create hierarchy? Or is there a relationship between responsibility and hierarchy?
Let me think through that because I'm seeing a whole bunch of stuff. I'm trying to make sure I cover all loopholes.
And it's not to you. It's not to you alone, Cliff. I'm asking a question based on what you said, so you have first crack at the answer. But to everybody, does relationship equal hierarchy? I mean, does responsibility equal hierarchy? Create hierarchy?
I don't. Yes and no. I think that that's one of the things I was notating when Rondell was talking was that there's so many different ways that we source that we can determine, like you can determine it based upon sequence, right? The fact that I came first. You can determine it based upon roles and responsibilities. There's so many different ways that you can try to determine what order is or how order is determined. And it depends on, I think it depends. And I think Rondell did a good job in kind of sourcing his perspective. He told us who he is, where he's getting it from, and whatnot. And based upon that, I understand where he's coming from, right? But I think it's based upon, your perspective, your point of view, what you're referencing, your reference points. And so I think it's a yes and no. It can be, doesn't always have to be, but it also can be based upon sequence, like just who came first, right? I think all those things can be.
But my question is:
All right.
Is hierarchy a bad thing? That is my question. Is it a bad thing? Whether the woman on top
Can
and
I
man
jump in?
below, yeah,
ahead,
is it a bad thing?
Good question, Rhonda. Go ahead, Courtney.
For the definition, what I've been seeing, I'm looking it up right now. Hierarchy is what could you call it? It's essentially a structure. It's like a way of organizing, and then responsibilities and obligations of an individual. So I don't think there's anything wrong with structure in itself, as we're trying to say. Like, it's a way of organizing it. If there are going to be responsibilities, then this is just a way of organizing it.
Chris, you struggling with that?
I'm just going through all the scenarios in my head, man, and ultimately I have to say yes.
You have to say what?
I have to say yes that it does create hierarchy.
Responsibility creates hierarchy.
Yes, in a relationship, you say in relationship, right?
It's just roles.
Right.
You have board members, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have a chair of the board. The chair of the board isn't necessarily higher on the organizational structure than anybody else. There just has to be someone that maintains order. We have this, right? We have this forum here,
Mm-hmm.
right? Jared came first. It was his idea. He
Mm-hmm.
created this forum, and Jared can say, we're not going to do it, or we're going to do it, or we're not going to move forward with this, or we're done with Water for the Thirsty. Doesn't mean the Water for the Thirsty is done. Somebody else could pick it up and do it. Jared just, he facilitates, right? So someone would say that he is in charge of it. But if we're all having this discussion, his point doesn't matter more than someone else's,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just a role that he's playing. But this role that he's playing doesn't necessarily give him authority.
Yeah, and I went to the definition, Courtney, just to see what it says. It also says
Sure.
dictionary from Oxford, the Oxford Dictionary says a system of organization in which people or groups are ranked one above the other according to status or authority. So it's a little bit more than responsibility and organizing. It's organizing with authority status.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And no, hierarchy is not a bad thing in and of itself. There are lots of instances where in the Bible where God establishes hierarchy, and there are lots of good uses for it even in our constructs today. So no, to Rhonda's the face of Rhonda's question, no, there's not an issue with. I would say that's my contribution to the conversation.
Yeah, I think that God, if you look at the way that you think about the government in heaven, it's set up that way too. There is a hierarchy, like as he said before. So if this is the way God operates, how would it be any different if it trickles down into how things are going to operate on Earth. It's not going to be far away from the what he does. Like this is how he does what he does.
Yeah, but so let me run down why is this important?
Well, it was, yeah,
You want
for
to
you
say?
to understand why it's important is the genesis of this conversation. This conversation started um, 2 months ago when I first got across here, and we never really finished it. And it came up again yesterday. So I wouldn't say it's what we were talking about, Jared. We were talking about male female relationships. Um, Jared was saying how it's a quality type of relationship, and I was saying um, not necessarily. There is structure. The man is the head of the home. You know what I mean? And but that is not necessarily a bad thing. There must be order. That's why with changing our rules happening in modern society now, and men becoming very effeminate and changing moral perspectives and stuff. There's no chaos in the home because we have lost that order that used to be there from before. And if we even went further in more controversial waters, and we're talking about um, um, the fact that this entire society that we live in was built for an. They're gonna sound bad, so you guys strap on for this one. You know, the last 2,000 years, this whole society was built from off of a patriotic, right, structure. Within the last 70 years, this whole feminism movement has come about, and we're gonna see where we're gonna carry it. We know what the past has brought us. Let's see where the future is gonna carry us. Yeah, where now a lot of things have been turned upside down. This is my opinion. You know what I mean? And I'm not afraid to be politically correct. You know what I mean? I talk, I say what I talk, and I mean what I say.
Mhm.
Sorry to say it that way, but you know what I mean? Because I know in this society we live in, we have to choose our words, and we have to be politically correct, and we have to be all inclusive, and we have to do all these things. You know what I mean? But I'm saying, so that was part the conversation came about, right? That kind of conversation. And now I want to be clear, I am not some kind of, you know what I mean, how to put it, boy. I'm not an officer. I am just saying that when it has order, things go how it's supposed to go. And when we somehow lose that order, things just go haywire. And we are seeing that happening in society at present because everybody have an opinion, everybody has this, and it has to be this way, and it has to be that way, and nobody ain't going over the Bible say. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
And
Randall, if I could, I want to add something to that actually.
yeah,
It's two things that I feel like we've lost. We've lost the this whole idea of order of roles
Jerry,
and functions, but
Jerry,
we've
let me
also
pause
lost.
you. Let me pause you. Pull some comments in because they've been in here for a minute.
Sure,
They're not gonna take you off course. They're
sure,
in
sure.
line. I just want to bring them in, and then I'll bring you back. Um, Mike Gibbons says, great discussion. Responsibilities do not indicate hierarchy. Look at the Godhead, different responsibilities, no hierarchy. However, there's hierarchy between the Godhead and the angels. Misharon continues, I'm not sure human beings can do without hierarchy on this side of Eden, which is an interesting thought there.
Mhm.
Gerald says, we do see hierarchy all through the Old Testament. Absolutely. We have to see the men being counted and not the women.
Which is more cultural than hierarchical, but okay.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Good words, Jerry. How about using Naomi as an example? She needed Boaz to redeem her true roots. That is also
That's cultural.
cultural. All right, but go ahead, Jerry.
So I think the other thing that we've lost is objective truth. And because there's now your truth, my truth, his truth, 66 genders, everything else in between, without objective truth, you can't have an objective look at rules and functions. There must be truth. And it's funny, truth in Hebrew, keep me honest, Jared. Aleph Tau Met, beginning, middle, end. Aleph Met Tau. So you can't have truth without beginning, middle, and end. Truth is holistic. Aleph also represents God. So if you take God out of Aleph Tau Met, you're left with Tau Met, which is death. So right there, it's telling you, for objective truth, you need God. If you take God out of truth, all you'll end up with is death. And that's exactly what we see now, which is the same thing Rondell is saying, right? You get rid of an objective truth, and now everybody just figures it doesn't matter what I do, it doesn't. And you have, it's not even just a gender. We like to narrow it down to just a gender role, but I mean, it's like, again, even using the example of in the corporate setting. Kenrick, I know you do like developments and stuff, right? Could you imagine Kenrick's electrician wakes up one morning and decides, you know what, I've been looking at a lot of architectural design things on HGTV. Now I'm going to design all the buildings for Kenrick. Crap is probably just going to be falling out of the sky because, dude, that's not the area of specialization. That's not your certification. That's not your role. Stick to your role and, All right, I'm done. I'll come off the soapbox.
Let me ask this follow-up question, right? Let us use the metaphor illustration of the body and the head on a body. Does the head have a hierarchical function on the body?
Mm-hmm.
Or just a responsibility that is different from the other parts of the body?
It's hierarchical.
Tell me more.
Hierarchy, because your brain is in your head. It gives direction.
So take the brain out, the body don't function. Take the heart out, what happens? Does the heart now have hierarchy over the head? Because the brain can't function without the heart. So does the heart now have hierarchy?
But I can get an artificial heart.
Huh?
I can get an
like that,
artificial
Jared.
I can get an artificial heart.
Jared, I liked where you were going. Cliff is busy Dark Knight, but that's all
No, I'm just saying, without this telling everything else what it needs to do and how to function,
All right,
there is nothing.
Let's do this, Cliff.
Okay.
Do you know the guy who plays Superman who is paralyzed from his neck down?
Yeah.
Why is he paralyzed?
He fell off the horse. I think it broke his neck.
He broke a bone in his neck.
Okay.
His brain is still functioning.
Mm-hmm.
Body not going.
Mm.
Does the brain have hierarchy?
In the wheelchair.
He's subject to the bone in the neck.
Not that other parts of my body don't play significant roles, but this has the hierarchy. This plays the ultimate role. Because even though I can't move, I got electric chairs that I could use my tongue. And now AI that we have can use my theta brain waves to make things move. Watch out now.
Jared, I like where you're going. I don't know that Cliff sees where you're going, but I like where you're going.
I know where you're trying to go. I'm sorry.
In simplest terms, the brain is up here. It's at the topmost. It's at the top of the hierarchy, but it's still subject to something that's down here. It can be impacted by something here, something.
I mean, I like that, and I think that's what Christ tried to talk to us about servant leadership. You know what I mean? So it's not completely dominating you. Like, I have my role, but we need to work together. Like,
all right. I think let me just put something inside the air here. I was listening to a preacher describe the relationship that's supposed to occur within the family unit. And I was very impressed with his analogy. And actually, it is in the Bible. And what he said, the relationship in a family is supposed to be a situation like this. The husband should be like the sun. The wife should be like the moon. She reflects the sun, and the children are like stars, right? So, in other words, everybody working together in unison, but that actually describes the type of relationship that's supposed to be occurring, right? The son sets the pace, the wife in harmony with the husband reflect what the husband's saying, and she disseminates it to the children, but everybody in harmony. I wonder if that clear up that matter a little more.
So I guess my thought on the moon is that the moon has more function than just reflecting the sun.
Yeah, the tides and seasons and these things, but go ahead, Alison.
I guess that's the point that I am trying to get to, right? In the body, which is the illustration where the head thing happens, the head has a very important role for keeping the body, as does the heart, as does the lungs, as does all these other body parts. And you take any one of them out and the whole body will collapse, function, not function. And so there's not so roles and responsibilities, functions, and everybody playing their role and working in order to carry out their function doesn't necessarily elevate one or prioritize one over the other or give one authority necessarily over the other. And I think even with that illustration of the moon, because of all the functions of the moon that are independent of the sun in the world, as are the stars, I would say that even that illustration keeps the responsibilities in the lane of the individuals or the functions that they're supposed to perform. And I would 100% affirm the idea that we all need to play our roles, stay in our, perform our roles, whatever those we determine those to be or understand those to be, or else there will be chaos. And a lot of the chaos that we experience in the world is because people are not in their roles. But I struggle with, and particularly in light of the gospel and Jesus's attempt to bring us all, because one of the challenges that humankind experience that I think is seen particularly in Genesis 3:16 is when we start to distinguish ourselves from other people by any kind of distinguishment, whether it be male, female, and our roles, whether it be Jews or Gentiles and our specialness to God, or people from one side of the train tracks to the other side of the train tracks, or whatever it is those distinguishing things are, prejudice and superiority become a thing, and particularly on this side of sin, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that you see pretty clearly in Jesus's message, even to his disciples, when the brothers come to him and say, we want to sit on your right and your left, and God's like, that's not for me to grant. But even if it was, we trying to be, servants to one another, right? You see that in when God kind of when Paul describes, there's no men, no women, no Jews, no whatnot. Not to say that they're not roles, but don't allow your role to inflate your position within the structure, right? Mm-hmm. Your role is important in the structure, and you have a responsibility to that role, to act in that role. But your role does not give you necessarily superiority and authority. And you even see that when God was hesitant to give the people a king, mm-hmm. right? That was not his plan. He never intended to give the people a king. He wanted them to be decentralized, autonomous, but unified, a congregation, right? And so I struggle with the idea of hierarchy in the the man-woman relationship because of how Genesis 1 reads. But I am 100% on board with roles and functions within any kind of relationship of any kind, particularly the man-woman relationship.
I could interject here a little bit. Second, Jared, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I just, before I forget this point. Now, my question is this, right? In the Bible, in the New Testament, because you said something and it jogged my memory, and where God described, where the church is described as the relationship, the church is described as the woman and Christ as the man, as the bride, right? My question is this. That was used as to compare the relationship between a man and a woman in the New Testament. Are you saying that that role that the church plays versus the role that Christ plays is significant? It doesn't matter. We are equal with Christ.
That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that Jesus uses a whole lot of illustrations about situations as they are to help people understand things that he wants them to understand without necessarily, for example, hold on. For example, when Jesus gives the parable of the shrewd manager who cheated on the bills when he realized he was being fired, and he affirmed the manager for being shrewd, was he then establishing the manager's behavior as being right and correct or best?
Was that illustration?
Exactly my point. That's exactly my point.
Right.
That's exactly my point. So he's using, so I would argue, and maybe I'm not necessarily, I could be flawed in my argument, but I would argue that he's doing the same thing with that illustration. And he's using the illustration in the way that the people have already culturally established this thing. Because it's not the only illustration he uses like that, where he uses a culturally established illustration to make a point about something. And it's descriptive, not prescriptive.
That's like the whole Abraham's bosom thing, where it was a cultural understanding, but he wasn't being theological, right?
You want me to say that again? I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
The whole parable with what was it, the beggar, and he goes to paradise. Well, is it not paradise? He goes to Abraham's bosom.
Abraham's bosom, right?
Right, which was a cultural mythology, if you want to call it that. So he was using that to get a point across, but it's not like he was providing them with theology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Well, but then that thought travels throughout the revelations and all of that, because remember the church is being described as a bride and as a woman and all these things. So that illustration just going throughout and getting lost in it.
Oh no. I think that's what I say. I think we're all on the same page. Again, the husband and wife representation of Christ and the church, it emphasizes, like you said, role and function, and it doesn't mean, and part of role and function, and I think this is it might have been Cliff who said it. Part of role and function is who is ultimately accountable. And I don't think we should lose sight of that. And that's the only thing society is doing now. But everybody could do anything and everybody's accountable for anything. That's not how it works. There will always be somebody who's ultimately accountable. What is funny is, I hear people say things. We don't like to read text in their entirety. So you'd always hear men who take a particular position say, well, women, you have to submit to your husbands, right? And then women who go running off the rails are just the very thought. And they forgot what precedes that. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church and give himself it. Last I checked, Christ died for the church. Now, I love my wife, but
it's a question on the table.
I guarantee anybody I'm going to die. All right, okay. So, and what's worse is Christ died for the church when they were wrong. They were in error.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like... But again, he's setting up role and function, who's ultimately accountable on certain grounds. And I just think we probably attach too much negativity to this idea of a hierarchy when in truth and in fact there may not be
That's my point.
the negativity that we think, that's attached to it.
So I'm not, at least for me, it's not a negativity to the hierarchy. It's is the intent hierarchy by God. Now, I understand that the hierarchy now exists, and 316 demonstrates that, and I think Shari made that point. Because of what took place, because of that, we are now in this hierarchical arrangement.
I get to
But is hierarchy what God intends for this dynamic? Because Shari even spoke to it earlier in her comments when she talks about here. It's the result, but it's not God's intent. And if God can restore us, why can't he restore the way men and women relate to each other? Why can't he restore the dynamics of men and women relationship to his intended dynamic, which is not necessarily a hierarchical one, but a functional role-based one, right? Because we don't see hierarchy until after sin.
And we're living in sin, though.
Huh?
You mean in the man and woman relationship, we don't see that? But
Yes.
there was hierarchy in heaven.
Yes, the man-woman relation, because that's what we're talking about. Yes, we don't. I'm not saying we don't see hierarchy. Period. Absolutely, we see hierarchy because he gave man to give dominion over the He gave man dominion over the earth and all the inhabitants of the earth, but he didn't give man, Adam, dominion over Adamah.
Like,
It's not necessarily dominion,
Sean just made, Jared.
Huh?
Sean just made a comment that is, I think, compelling.
Oh, let me get Jerry first, and then I'll push Sean in. The stars are for the sons. Good point, Jerry. They're just further away. They're stars. The analogy implies that the children and the father are the same. So the children become fathers eventually. They do. I mean, and then they have their own families, and then the cycle repeats, right? So yeah, the children are fathers in the making. I don't know.
Yes.
And mothers in the making, eventually. So they are technically mothers and fathers. Cain was a father eventually, and so on. Yeah. Thank you, Shari. We did. Yes. Thank you, Kendrick, for not getting us in trouble with Shari. We are lamenting the social role and obligation and not speaking to our spiritual role and obligations. Absolutely, Sean. I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
So ultimately, we're on this side of sin, and we got to deal with this side of sin.
Yes, but we also have the gospel, which is trying to bring restoration on this side of sin. The gospel is not just restoring; it's restoring all of humanity to all that God intends, including that dynamic which is on the side of sin.
Can you have that dynamic on this side of sin?
That's the same question of can you live on this side of sin and not sin? Absolutely. The answer is yes, you can. Absolutely, the answer is yes, you can. And let's go to Ephesians chapter, because I had an opportunity to see this book in a slightly different way. When we go to Ephesians, we go to chapter 1, and we do it Courtney style, right? Not Courtney will be reading, but we're doing it Courtney style. The book of Ephesians is a book about unity, right? So Paul walks us through chapter 1, establishing some ideas about being chosen in Christ, the spirit of wisdom, Jesus's position of authority in the heavens, being alive in Christ, and then all of us being reconciled as one into Christ, right?
Okay.
And he does that 3 to 4, and then he describes the whole idea of the body, and the different parts working together, the body of Christ, of which Christ is the head, which is why I asked about the head conversation. Do you have a body with if you just have a head.
Mhm.
All right. But he sets this theological foundation about the unity of the authority of Christ and the unity of the body around Christ. But then he goes in and says, well, what does this unity look like for you guys? And that's where he goes on and says, all right, for this unity to work here, husbands, you need to love your wife as Christ loves the church. Wives, you need to submit and respect to your husbands. Fathers, you need not to exasperate your children. And children, you need not to be disobedient to your parents. Slaves, honor your work for Christ with your owners, and slave owners, treat your people like brothers. So without changing their circumstance or identifying them in their circumstance, he shows how this whole unity thing can work. And so I'm arguing, and open for the conversation, that yes, Cliff, to your question, it can be done when submitted and under the Spirit, because that's part of what Jesus has come to do as part of the restoration. And if we separate that from the other parts of spirituality, then I think we kind of missing the point, because it's all related.
I don't. I hear you. I don't disagree. Think it's very difficult, but I don't think it's. I don't disagree.
I like Chris's statement here. It's rich. Genesis 3:16 states that Adam, I'm not sure it says should rule over Eve, but more than it says that he will rule over Eve. I don't, yeah. And that she would resist this. Sin destroys godly hierarchy. I would throw in there, and this is just me, and share your thoughts. I would reframe that to say sin creates ungodly hierarchy.
Yeah, it becomes a counterfeit.
I mean, I hear you, because we looking at Ephesians, right? And he's saying in same chapter 2, verse 3, all of us used to live that way, following the passionate desires and inclinations of our sinful nature. By our very nature, we are subject to God's anger, just like everyone else. But just that first part, that is telling us that we are naturally okay with letting sin be our master. You know what I mean? So if you want to go all the way back and talking about hierarchy, who are we allowing to be the master of our lives? Or, you know what I mean? It's either this sin or God. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of times, I think what happens as that trickle down effect, if we're going to let sin be our master, then all this other stuff is going to be out of whack too. We don't even want to submit to God. How are we going to submit to my wife or submit to or down the line? Like, it's not going to work.
I like that you said that, Courtney. It then shifts to where the hierarchy actually is.
Right.
It's me to God and me to sin. And that's really where the hierarchy is. And if that hierarchy is out of whack, then I either, if I'm in the right hierarchy as a servant of God, then I act in my role and be a faithful servant to him in how I deal with other people, right? And then I'm acting in my role in the order that he creates.
Yeah.
But if I decide I'm not going to submit to God and put myself in God's position, which is bringing myself to sin and making sin my master, now I'm trying to dominate everything underneath me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You actually saw that with Eve, right? Where Eve had a choice first. Do I submit to God or do I listen to this colorful serpent? And she's like, yeah, serpent is pretty cool. And then she brings this, and then Adam makes the same decision, right? It's like, do I go with Eve? Because Eve would have died in her sin, and Adam could have had himself another Eve, right? But he's like, nah, I'm gonna submit to Eve now, which is effectively what he did. So she gave dominion to the serpent, and then he gives his dominion, right? I'm using it, dominion to her. And it's all upside down now. But yeah.
Yeah, man. That's
Yeah,
all I can see, man.
one of the reasons that this is important to me is because of the gospel, and the gospel, Jesus does he demonstrates great pains to take away the things that elevate people above people. Jesus goes to great pains in the gospel message to have us see each other as equals, without abandoning and neglecting our functions and rules. And that's one of the reasons why I have a hard time with the intent of I'm not completely closed off to it, but a compelling enough case is not yet presented, and it's just to me. And so I am not establishing any kind of authority here. I am just sharing my thoughts on the matter.
Jared, maybe that's one of the challenges. Like you said, we how do we, especially in a modern society, with red pill, blue pill, and everything in between, pink pills, I don't know, how do we have that equality while not abandoning roles and functions? And I guess that's where, that goes to what Sean was saying. It is, we have to understand that roles and functions are implicitly rooted in some spiritual dimension. Um, Getting that across, maintaining that, I don't want to use the word enforce, but enforcing that without a hierarchy is kind of like the tricky part, right? I'm not saying it can't be done, but I guess that is where the nuance comes in. It's like, well,
So
Hold on, Kenrick. Miss Sharon just put this thing. I think she was a little delayed in the thought because it just came through. Then Eve, she was talking to what we were saying before, about what Jerry you were saying about the serpent and Eve and whatnot.
mm,
Then Eve loses her dominion to Adam, which is what Genesis 3:16 is showing. Eve loses her dominion, her co-equal dominion to Adam, as a result of what she did or didn't, what they did. Now I'm gonna say what they did.
mhm.
Quickly, this came in while I was saying this, Kenrick. God is the sovereign ruler of the universe. He has all power and authority. He trusts the rules of leadership to individuals in the family, church, the workplace, the government. Could you imagine if everyone reflects this? Well, that would be awesome. That would be heaven, right? Kenrick?
Yeah, that'd be heaven on it.
so I guess and I could be off base here. I guess my struggle with some of the comments are it's like I guess I'm trying to figure out what's the intent of of being, because I'm hearing control or providing direction from in this hierarchical role. And I guess I'm trying to understand what is the intent? Why is it so important for someone to be in dominion over someone else fulfilling whatever role or responsibility? Kenrick.
Kendrick, oh my goodness.
I was trying to give somebody else an opportunity
I feel that.
to stay there. But I would say, Kenrick, if we are in the right posture and if the hierarchy is with God, then God is the one who's ultimately giving direction, right? And He's the one setting direction.
Yeah, I look at my home and like the way me and my wife function. I've already given you insight into extracurriculars, but like other things, right? So in in finances, the kids, ventures we do, travel. Like if you take the whole gamut, right? I don't think there are. I think the roles and responsibilities are broken down into where each of us are there's passion and excitement around it. There is proximity to it. There is some type of intelligence or behind it or experience or what. Like I think when you break all of those things down, and ultimately, like we're going through a situation now where I really want something, and one of my prayers is for God to speak to me about it. But also the prayer is like speak to her as well, because this is a conversation and a joint conversation that we're having, right? And this is a decision that affects both of us. And when she has something like that, she prays the same. I mean, so I guess I guess if the intent is to be able to dictate direction and all that, then I definitely hear and understand it. But if the I just don't I want to understand why do we need to it all seemed to be coming from like this dominion perspective and control and providing direction, as opposed to and I really like what Sharon said, because I was thinking the same thing. You can't take something away from somebody that didn't have it. And so I was just I'm just trying to understand where it's coming from. Rondell, good Lord.
I love it. I love it.
I was just trying to listen. All right. So
What?
let me put it this way. Let me put it this way. I think I caused enough trouble. So I
No.
just not the pool. I try not to stir the pool anymore. You know what I mean? Let the pool close
No,
down more.
man,
But all right.
it's perspective. That's part of the conversation.
All right. All right. Um, I don't know if I don't know. I believe to build anything you need structure, proper structure. And you are in the corporate world, Kenrick and Jerome, and I don't know about others. What they do, but I know you guys into the corporate aspect of life, and without an organizational chart in any organization, and you want to do a business, you'll get nowhere, because everybody come in, nobody know what to do, everybody do what they want. We both know as an organization, we make no money, right? The only way we can move the organization forward is there must be a structure. Who reporting to who doing this? We gotta chart out different roles. Okay, you gonna do that. You gonna do that. You gonna do that. Everybody, you only report to me, and somebody has to take a decision, because everybody confused. But in order for us to go forward, somebody has to say, all right, everybody confused, we go in here, and the chips fall with me. There must be if someone say so. For me, when it comes to your home, there must be a structure. Now, me ain't talking about that's all I'm saying. There must be structure. Now, structure for me is not from a dictator perspective. You know what I mean? We're talking theory, because however a person applies that in a home and it works for them, then good for them. You know what I mean? They probably have a different structure. That doesn't mean to say their structure is bad or whatever. If that working, then part all good. You know what I mean? But for me, I believe there must be some kind of structure. And I believe that God set a structure in the beginning as to, okay, if nobody knows what structure to adopt, let me start with the one that God gives. and then everybody branch off and I guess do whatever they want after that. But let me start with the one that was prescribed. So when I look through the Bible, I see the one that was prescribed was a hierarchical relationship, and it's not. When I say hierarchical relationship, it's not to say, well, again, it's something bad, but there must be a structure there. Okay, there's a dad, there's a mom, and they have their roles. You know, the dad have a particular role, the mom have a particular role. But what the mom could do, I cannot do. What I could do, she cannot do. You know what I mean? But we work together hand in hand. But in all of this working together, there's a structure. You know what I mean? At least I believe there's supposed to be a structure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I believe I don't I 100% agree with structure. I guess when I look at the role, when I look at my relationship, the relationship me and my wife have as it relates to the family, and then the kids, right? I see the roles sometimes changing. Once again, not in the bedroom, but I see the roles sometimes changing based upon experience and like all the things I said, right? So there are things that I will take a back seat to and I will give my opinion on and she will make the decision on, and then there are things that she will take a back seat to and I'll make a decision and she'll give her opinion and we'll have the conversation. So I guess my thing is that in the relationship, there are roles and responsibilities and there's a structure that always exists, but those roles and responsibilities sometimes change and differ based upon the situation and based upon, and I guess, and I'm not, and I'm in no way relating this to, to how the role and responsibility between us and God should be. But, going back to where we were and, the ideal, which I think was stated a couple different times, which I definitely agree with. I think that, to a certain extent, it is kind of flat. And based upon certain situations, certain things, certain people take that particular role and they'll take the responsibility of making a decision and taking charge. And then the others, they don't.
Okay, so my question is this: how would a home where, let me say, a dad, like let me say I have a home and I'm the dad. How about if I play a role where I don't play an authoritative role at all? I just take a back seat. The children come, a decision, one ask the mom. I just take a back seat. I don't perform. I play that role. You know what I mean? And something happens in the backyard. We hear noise. Tell them, mom, let you go and check it out. Or things to that effect. You know what I mean? Or decisions to be made. Or a big bully guy come to the door and he tongue along and whatever, and the children run in the bedroom and say, look at this man by the door, he's a stranger, he looks like a criminal. I say, tell him I'm going to check him. Tell him I'm going to check him.
So
You know what I mean?
so once again, I think roles change, right? And so in those particular roles, if I'm married to Salt, the movie, like I will go out, but I don't have a particular skill set to take this Bama down. I'm a real estate developer. I don't have that skill set,
But you have a
right?
fun though.
I can structure the grave and the casket, and I can do that, but I can't. She has a role, so in no way will I take on a particular. Once again, it's not about the way I look at it is not about me exerting whatever it is. It's who has the propensity to do well in this particular position and situation,
Agreed.
right?
Agreed.
And given that, you can take the lead on that because that's your gift. That doesn't mean my voice isn't heard, right? But I'm cool with that. But then there are other situations where I'm not. In my household, I'm not the big dude, but yeah, if a burly guy comes, I'm going out there, right?
Why?
Take
Why?
that
What's
L.
that?
Why?
Because I have the better chance.
He gonna take the L. That's cool. Like,
I have a better chance. But like I said,
yeah,
if I'm married to Salt, I will escort, but she's taking the lead.
yeah. You just hold her bag, and let her do her thing.
Oh, 100. Yeah. Well, I'm not gonna hold the bag, dog. But
No, but
yeah.
I'm letting you.
That's what you
Understand.
be doing. You be
But
holding
if
back.
you delegate, it's cool. Like, if they have the talent, let them do it. Like, it is what it is. Like,
Hey,
say
man.
if you married and the husband is actually a chef, he cooks better. It's just what it is. You're gonna say, "Oh, it's your job to cook." Like, oh, just let him do it.
Oh, this
Like,
was
he's actually
yeah.
nice. Like, it's cool. Like, it's
And
not that serious.
to me, because we're on the same team, we are deciding.
Correct.
We decide on how this thing plays out. It's not I'm absconding my responsibility or just sitting out and deferring to you because or whatever. It's a how are we deciding that this thing is going to look, and there's no hard and fast on how it should look, except the only thing I would point in here and say one of the things that the Bible does demonstrate pretty religiously, and Rondell kind of hinted to it with the role of the priest, is that the priest is the representative to the people. And there is a demonstration that this is not just cultural, this is established by God, that the priest is the man. So at least for the representing the group part, the man has that, at least that responsibility to be the representative for the group, between the group and God. God don't necessarily deal with the whole group. He's dealing with the representative on behalf of the group. And so that is one of those, we're going to talk about responsibilities that's there. But like in terms of how the functioning of the actual group is, there doesn't seem to be a prescriptive on how that unfolds and plays, except that we are a team working together to do it. I do want to, Sean and Mishan been in the comments. I'm gonna
Okay.
skip around in the comments because Sean makes a powerful point here. And I think maybe we are using words synonymously. And he makes this distinction here that structure is not necessarily hierarchy or is not hierarchy.
Mhm.
And
Very good.
we can't interchange the two.
Mhm.
Structure is not hierarchy. Structure can be represented in hierarchy,
Mhm.
but it's not. But structure can be represented without hierarchy. You can have a flat structure and still have structure. And I'm gonna go back to the top where he says hierarchy came about because man fell, and that's what we see in Genesis 3:16.
Mhm.
It was prophecy that said the man shall lead the woman. However, man and woman in Christ, then they are different functions. He goes on to say, without the need of hierarchy, because God is the head. So looking at it, some rules are interchangeable. He then goes on to say, remember from the foundation, there was already a plan for redemption to restore things back to the way they were intended to be. Sharon then makes another powerful point. After sin, which the man chose rather than obedience to God's word, Eve loses her dominion, but it is restored in Genesis 3:15 by becoming the bearer of the seed who rescues and restores humanity, which I think is pretty powerful. Right?
Mhm.
Now she becomes the one who, out of her, which is an interesting idea, right?
Yes, it is.
Cain comes out of Adam and Eve. He's not a third being. He's Adam and Eve.
Mhm.
He's Adam and Eve.
Mhm.
They're all one now. They're all Adam now,
Mhm.
literally. Sean says, remember Eve was made to be a helpmeet to Adam, so she was an extension of him. And then he goes on to say the original Hebrew phrase is Isa Kenegdo, which is better translated as a helper suitable for him or a helper corresponding to him, which
Mhm.
I think is, I just wanted to add that to the conversation there.
Hierarchy means head, right?
No, it means a ranking of it's a system of organization, which is a structure. So it's a structure. It is a structure in which people are ranked according to status or authority.
So then that means that there is a head at the top of that authority.
Well, people ranked according to authority. There may not be one head, but there is an authoritative relationship in the rankings, in the placement of people. It's not functional, it's authority. So you can have a functional structure where the structure is arranged by the roles that people put on. You're responsible for finance, you're responsible for IT, you're responsible for cleaning, you're for maintenance, you're responsible for this.
Right. But if it comes down to the top where everybody has the same authority, at some point, if we differ in authority, then how is the decision made? If it comes down to a 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2 or 3 versus 3, and we're split, how is the decision made? Somebody has to be the highest authority.
Or you develop a system for making those decisions. I'm saying we live in a society here in America where you have 3 co-equal branches of government. So how are decisions made?
2 votes against 1.
Exactly. But Sean makes a good point. The people of Israel had that same logic, Cliff.
No, I get it. Yes.
They were looking at the other people and say, so how is this decision going to be made? We want a king.
I got you.
Because God has set them up with a system where they needed to be able to figure it out, because he wants them to be one in their mind and their thoughts. He wants them to be able to do that dialogue, have them hard conversations and figure it out together. Right? You see that in Matthew 18 when he talks about the process for dealing with brothers who are in conflict. He goes through this whole process of making sure that everybody is in dialogue together and tries to work it out, right? Because he wants
I'm not disagreeing with it, and I'm not even having a conversation for the sake of trying to make this into something that is not. But even in that structure, even in that system, God still highlighted the man.
He highlighted him as a representative, as the person that he would come and ask the question to. Yeah,
regardless of how you state it,
he is accountable.
He was still highlighted. So I feel like when we have these conversations, ultimately, the answer is already there. I feel like we having an LGBTQ conversation where we just dance around the answer because we really don't want to say what it is. It just is what it is, man. It was established. Yep. This is how it is. It doesn't mean that we can't work together. It doesn't mean that we can't share. It doesn't mean that we can't make this thing work out. But when it ultimately comes down to it, the decision has been made. Like Henry said, me and my wife share.
What's established, Cliff? What are you saying is established?
Thank you, Lorraine.
What are you saying is established that it is what it is? What is it?
What I'm saying, what I'm establishing is that it is what it is. When it ultimately comes down, I'm responsible. I'm the head. I am the head. Me and my wife share a lot of stuff. We like Kendrick said, we have equal responsibilities and everything else. But when it all boils down to it, I'm responsible.
Responsible for what though?
Everything.
What does that mean?
It means whatever fault, whatever falls short, whatever doesn't happen, whatever decision that ultimately needs to be made that we can't agree on, I am responsible. Me, head, male, I make the final decision. Established, instituted. Whether you like the way I put it or frame it or not, LGBTQ, it is what it is. And it's not going to change on this side of sin because on this side, there has to be a head. We can't continue to keep just saying we would love for everything to work that way. Don't get me wrong. I would love for everything to work that way. But at some point, decisions are made that have to be made by someone.
Okay, so if you're the head and you make all the decisions.
No, I didn't say I make all the decisions. I didn't say I make all.
You said at the end of the day, if you don't agree, you make the decision, right?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Okay. So if you make the decision, then if you're saying since sin, this is how it is. This is just how it'll be. There's no desire to shift that mindset for what God intended.
That's what I mean. Okay, so God intended for us both to work together, which is what we do. But
Right.
like you said, after sin, there was a dominion structure set up. So I still,
that's one of the things we established. We weren't able to conclusively determine that it was set up more than it was described as being the consequence or the result. That's two different things. God, I'm not sure that Genesis 3:16 is God setting this up more than He's saying this is what's going to be your.
I'll retract my word. I'll retract my word and rephrase it and say that's the consequences, right? Okay. And because of those consequences, this is the system that has been established. And I've seen it throughout. You can say culturally or not, but God had a culture. A Hebrew, Jewish, whatever. No, sorry, not Jewish. Jew, Hebrew culture. And you can go away from that, but that was his culture. That was his culture, the culture that he established, the culture that he provided shade for, the culture that he provided heat for, the culture that he said, I want you to spread your culture throughout the world. That was his culture. We can say it's cultural, but that's what it is.
But then he comes and upends that culture.
because that culture again sought to take what he meant to do and blow it out of proportion, which is what we do. We take things. The same thing we talk about when I talk about an addiction, man. We take things that had its origin in medicinal use, and we find a way to exploit it and mess it all up. You know what I'm saying? Alcohol was used as a cleanser. We found a way to bottle that and just misuse it. So on this side of sin, man, we gonna keep doing that stuff. If I want to live a passive, non-combative lifestyle, I am at some point going to be forced to not live in that lifestyle. Why? Because somebody is going to seek to exert dominion over me. It just is what it is. If you present yourself as a sheep, wolves will appear. You got me? If you present yourself as somebody that can be taken advantage of, you can be minding your business. Wolves will encircle you. And I'm just making.
I got you, Cliff. I got you. I receive what you are saying. I won't necessarily co-sign it, but I receive it.
I got you. No, I know. It's the LGBTQ thing. Nobody wants to co-sign it.
Miss Sharon and Shari are making some profound comment here in the chat that I want to add to the conversation.
Go for it, man. Go for it.
Wait. I'm gonna go to Miss Sharon first because and Sean, I see you, but I'm gonna skip to these ladies first. She says, like Adam. So I guess she was responding to you, Cliff. She said, I am responsible. And she's like, well, like Adam was responsible for sin coming into the world. He wasn't conned out of his dominion.
Agree.
I pause here because
that statement isn't theologically correct, though.
What?
Statement isn't theologically correct.
What do you mean?
Sin entered the world of humanity when Eve sinned. There was a stopgap mechanism. Had Adam decided not to sin, Eve would have died for her sin, which means she would have suffered the consequence. And Adam, if he had not sinned, again, because of the hierarchy, could have gotten another Eve and kept this thing going.
So tell me.
But the only way you can say sin wouldn't have entered the world is if Eve could have sinned and not had the consequence for action.
Tell me what you do with Romans chapter 5. Particularly verse 12, but the whole chapter 5.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you do with that. And while you're thinking about that, because I'm sure I'm almost sure, I'm not sure and affirm me or not, that's kind of where she's coming from. or at least the theological basis for her statement. But tell me what you think about
No,
it.
and that's what I'm saying. I get the statement again. To understand what the word, the Bible means, you have to understand what the words mean. If we say that you can't say there was no sin prior to Adam sinning.
No, I don't think she was saying that.
Right, but what I'm saying is, if you say sin entered the world, Eve was going to, if Adam had not sinned as well, Eve would have died and paid the penalty for her sin. What that looks like, we don't know. She might have died in an instant. God might have just banished her from the garden and she would have won. We don't know, but the point is there was a penalty to save, a penalty to pay for her action.
Perhaps. And
the reason all of us face the penalties, again, going back to what Cliff and Rhonda was saying, there's a hierarchy. And once the man gets into the mix now, because he has the seed which you're supposed to nurture and germinate and multiply, once his seed is corrupted, then everything that comes from his lineage is now going to be corrupted. Which is why Jesus had to come as the second Adam and basically stop.
So who was responsible for sin coming into the world? Because that's a statement. Who was responsible for sin coming into the world? Theologically?
I say Eve.
Okay. And what does Paul say in Romans?
We all suffer the consequence because Adam jumped on board. But
what does
I know we have time, so we can do that in the after party, right?
Okay. I just Romans 5 says through one man, sin entered the world.
Right. Which literally means through the choice of one man. Because he chose Eve instead of choosing God.
And that's what
is corrupted. But I get you.
That's what I understand Ms. Sharon to be saying, that Adam was responsible ultimately because he made that choice. And it was because of his choice, he's now responsible. And she was responding to Chris' statement, I assume. And if I'm not correct, she could correct me. Chris' statement about him being responsible, ultimately. This is really only a statement about the man's responsibility more than whether it started with Eve or started with Adam. I don't think this was a nuanced statement about who originated it, but who was responsible, right? Because while she may have originated it, he was still responsible. I want to get to Shari's statement because she says, I hear a lot of fear and a need for control. God didn't want to give Israel a king because he wanted to be their head, their leader, their Lord. He was the one who was in control. He is the head, capital V, not you or any human. He never intended for humans to be in control of anything. He wants to be the one who leads you, your family, and you.
Agree. But then
Jeremiah now asks a powerful question. In the new earth, will we men still have dominion? Because I think the answer to that question kind of gets back to what's God's intent.
Okay, I see. I see what you're saying.
Here's one of the things that I think we want to be careful.
But
dominion doesn't just mean in terms of we narrow it down to dominion in a relationship sense.
So while that may be true, the context of this conversation is and his question is Genesis 3:16, where we're talking about Eve losing her dominion, right?
Right.
So that's the context I am assuming that this question is coming from. Why it's in the context.
Biblically, it does. It does. We will have different roles and functions in heaven. Some of us will rule over other kingdoms, other things that God created. What this is like after party discussion. What is the implication of the rulership and dominion of those things there, right? Because there's actually a biblical principle, and I'm segueing a little bit, a biblical principle for the creation of wealth. How wealth is supposed to be created and garnered based on that principle of be fruitful, multiply, have dominion, and subdue. It's actually a blueprint as to how to be successful in business, right? So as long as we don't go too far with the
right. Yeah.
And we understand that even the earth made new, if we're going to rule, be princes, as they call it, princes of other things God has created, and we will rule over them, then that implies there'll be dominion of some kind. Not a negative dominion, but Yeah.
Right. I don't believe Jerry is asking about broad dominion. I do believe, because of the context of our conversation and the loss of dominion of Eve that we all acknowledged, he's asking, given that we've established that this new way of being is Genesis 3:16, the tussle between the man and the man ruling over the woman, or the man having dominion over the woman in that sense, right? In the earth made new, when things get reset and restored, will men have that dominion? Will that tussle take place, and will that dominion be there?
Well, Sean is pretty emphatic. He's like, no.
I say Adam. I'll say Adam will have dominion.
Yeah.
Adam and Adama.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
So it will go back to them having dominion, and that 3:16 dynamic will get reset to its intent. I think that's where Jerry is going with this question. And
that's what I think that's what I saw it as. All
right. Jerry, to you, Shari says he never spread. No, it wasn't to you. It was to Cliff. He never said spread your culture throughout the world. He said introduce the world to him. Culture is a limitation that humans place on God. And
understood. That's me and my wording.
Fear and control. That's the words that the lady used, right?
Yeah. She said she hears a lot of fear and control. But she made
a lot of
fearing things.
Okay.
So just for clarification on my part, because sometimes I use my words generally. I think the intent is never to be in a position where we are like dominating someone. I think the intent here on this side of sin is to try to live as symbiotic as we can in a cohesive relationship. However, I do still believe that there is still a head underneath God, understanding that God is ultimately the head. God has always shown that he has talked to a particular, I see Kenrick scream. Has always shown that he has chosen a particular gender to communicate with. Yes. In reference to being responsible for their said family, or however that moves through. So that's what I am trying to say. Again, in my household, we share in responsibilities, we share in roles, we have discussions, we go over things. I am not dominant over what she says. She is not necessarily dominant over what I'm saying. We discuss things and try to move forward for the best. When we bought this house, there was a discussion. I have carte blanche over the basement in one room, and she has the rest of the house. So we have discussions. When I want to do something in the basement, I listen to her input, but ultimately I have the carte blanche over the basement. If she wants to do something in the kitchen or the living room and I disagree, ultimately she has the carte blanche over that. So if she wants to go with pink furniture and I disagree, we've already had a discussion. If she chooses it, then I'll just have to live with the pink furniture, right? And that's how it ultimately works. However, if there are times that there is not a consensus, the weight falls on me. That's all I'm saying. As far as culture is concerned,
I think we should dive into that at another time.
Okay.
I like that thought. I'm just looking at the time, and I'd like to unpack that a little bit as to why you believe that, or not you, Cliff, why that idea is pervasive. I singling out you because you're representing it.
That's fine. I'm good. I'll represent it. I'll choose my words better next time.
Yeah, the
Because I
word
can see
Jerry,
Jimmy scratching his head like, oh Lord.
the word Jerry was rule, which also was dominion. It's one and the same idea. But the word in English was rule, but it's the same idea as dominion because that's the idea. Ms. Sharon then asked the question in response to what we were asking before: is there a need for dominion? But I want to use Shari's question to kind of transition us towards the end. Does God have the power to restore everything or anything? Do we believe that? Or are we selective about what God can restore? Can God restore the dynamic between men and women on this side of sin? Do we believe
On
in the
this side of
gospel?
sin?
Hold on. Let me just restate my question and then I'll give you
Okay.
speed. Sorry if I'm not representing your idea. Help me fix it. Do we believe in the gospel idea that God is trying to restore creation and reconcile creation and everything to himself? And does that include the relationship between men and women and that dynamic?
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. They say with God anything's possible. So that's how I'm leaving with. And I come back to what I said earlier. I think that because of the sinful nature that we are in, we're naturally always going to be resisting being dominated over. Like we don't want God to be our master for the most part, and it seemed like either party, either sex, whatever, nobody wants to be the first servant. It seemed like everybody wants to be the first one to name the stakes. I'm going to be the one to say what we're going to do or whatever the case is. And I see that fight all the time. You know what I mean? Who's going to be the first one to say, "Hey, I'm going to serve first"? Nobody's running for that. All these discussions, all these debates is always the same thing. You know what I mean? I'm not pulling for what they call the feminism. I'm not pulling for all the other stuff. Like for the most part, nobody wants to serve first. That's not the banner anyone's holding up. I'm going to serve. I'm going to take care of you first. We're supposed to be one. And as they say in the word, as a husband, the man, we're supposed to look at the woman as a part of us, like part of our body. Like nobody's treating it like that. Not a lot of people, I should say.
Because I think a lot of people think serve equals weakness. Period.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everything about that is doesn't appeal to us in our nature now.
That's powerful, Courtney, because that's one of the things that Jesus tries to turn on its head with his gospel, right? It's the servant leader idea. You know, those who wants to be great among you must first be a servant, must be like the little child, must be the one who comes and wash all the dirty feet. If you really want to be the head, then your role is to wash the dirty feet. That's how you head. Sorry, say that again, Rhonda.
The meek shall inherit the earth.
Real headship by the gospel, which is the restorative idea, is that servant posture. Not the directing posture.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Shari, for that idea and for allowing us to kind of at least put some kind of a bow on this part of this conversation. Because it gives us a transition. She comes back to say, I believe he must restore it because his image is at stake. Man and woman were made in his image. When our connection and relationship is jacked up, his image is jacked up. If we are made in the image of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, when there is no harmony in our relationship, this reflects poorly on God. We are one. We are the same, Adam and Adamah. When we represent differences as barriers or ranks, that is reflected on God to the world. We are supposed to bear his character too. I would extend that further, Shari, and say it extends to the rest of the family as well and all the rest of humanity, because it's Adam and Eve, the man and the woman, because they create all the rest, but it's also all of humanity that's the image. And when all of humanity does that exact same thing that happened in this man and woman relationship, and we extend those barriers, it's the same kind of thing that happens as well. And I think that's what one of the things in particular Jesus was talking to, and it was so prevalent among the Jews when they started relating to the Gentiles, that because they couldn't be reconciled, because they couldn't be unified, because of how they perceived their role and how they used it as barriers to the relationship, the image of God from humanity, from the people, from Adam, the group, the plural, is flawed when we start to do that. And it could be drilled down even to the man and woman relationship. So it's true for both that and for the collective. So I would say thank you, Shari, for pointing us in that direction. All right. So we're at that point where we get to reflect on all the good conversation that we had. And have it not just be good conversation, but say, what kinds of things are we reflecting on, chewing on, taking away, walking away with, as a result of being a part of this conversation. I think Shari gave us some food for thought there and takeaways. And I'm gonna start with the Adama. Lauren.
So I kept thinking, like, no man can serve two masters. When we're talking about, when I think of the hierarchy that I'm accepting is the one where there's God and then us, right? Because the master you choose is the hierarchy you're choosing to be a part of. And the hierarchy you choose to be a part of determines how you function. So if I look at how I'm functioning, it tells me who my master is. So that's how I'm looking at it. So look at how we're functioning, and it will tell you which hierarchy you're part of, therefore which master you're serving up. And that's
wow. That's word. That's word. How about you, Courtney?
Oh man, how do I follow that?
No.
My man, I like to thank Mr. Rondell, man. You came with the good word. I just think, as you were saying, I can see societally that there is this attack on this home, on this relationship dynamic. And it's got to be for a good reason. You can just sit down here and drill down just how it affects us all. So I just think, again, what Lorraine said is just in support of, being obedient to one master. I think once we get to the point where we're kind of just serving our own desires, it's just all downhill after that. For real.
Wood. How about you, Jerry? Oh, before I go with Jerry, Kenrick, I know I had the mute thing on, but if you had contributions, I hope the mute wasn't keeping you from sharing them.
Yes.
Jerry.
Yeah. I think it ties into maybe what Lorraine was saying, where it's if we, there's this old analogy. I know some pastors used to do it when you're getting married, you get marriage counseling. They would do this whole triangle. The man is on the right, woman is on the left, and as they move to Christ, they get closer to each other. Yeah, I see it that way in terms of, you know, the whole dynamic, the whole relationship gets restored as you individually, and I dare say collectively, move closer to Christ. And if that isn't happening, then you just expect Genesis 3:16, like all out crazy topsy-turvy war. Everything is out of sync. Everything is, yeah.
Well,
Because ultimately, even if you know, even like what Cliff was talking about, the dynamic he has with his wife, that is based on their relationship with God, right? So, yeah.
Jerry Sean agrees with you. All right. Henrik.
Sawyer, chill. I don't know if I have a takeaway. I think it was a spirited conversation. I think that there were some excellent points made. But I don't know if I have a takeaway.
How about you, Cliff?
Man, my takeaway is real simple, man. I'm just my takeaway is that I pray that we all make it to heaven so we no longer have to have these type of conversations and we can find out exactly how it's supposed to be. You know what I mean? How it's supposed to be so we can live that in eternity. That's my takeaway, man.
Well. Randall.
Well, I agree with Cliff. I am in the same boat. I wish that, you know, first and foremost, I was happy to meet all you guys. Some of you I knew before, some of you I don't know. It was nice having this conversation. These are the kind of conversations Jared and I is having our private time while we're supposed to be having some kind of other conversation. Somehow we end up on these topics, and it's become real spirited and passionate, you know. So he pulled me into this meeting tonight to continue it, you know. But it was fun. I enjoyed, you know, hearing everybody, you know. My takeaway is that, you know what, the Bible is there for everybody to read. You know what I mean? That's my takeaway. So, you know, say prayers, talk to the master, and you know, it depends on your personal relationship. You reflect accordingly. You know what I mean? I'm not here to tell anybody how to. So that's my takeaway.
I got my takeaway from Shari. It's the reminder that humanity. One of the challenges that I continue to experience is English is such a strange language that man could mean all kinds of things. It could mean that man, it could mean all of man, and it could mean just men, right? And one of the clear ideas that you see in Genesis 1 is that humankind is the image of God, all of us together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if that understanding underlies if that understanding sits at the base of all that we do or how that we process, particularly in light of the gospel, it would shift the way we view other things. And I thought it was a profound shift just for me to remember that because we are the image of God, how we deal with each other, which is why the simple message of Jesus is love God, love people, serve under him, and relate to others according to how he does, because it reflects his image. I think that's a profound paradigm shift for me. So thank you, Shari, for that reminder. So I had a couple comments that I don't want to leave hanging before I go to the other takeaways in the chat. He was saying that when it said that man is the head of the home, he said man as a high priest is representation of God, the head of the home. He said, so not only God has the power to restore, but he has a plan in place to do so. Shari then says that her takeaway is that she believes God can restore anything, but there are moments where she feels discouraged or afraid about her circumstances, and that she can become complacent with the effect of sin and forget that God can restore, fix, and revive anything. Jeremiah says his takeaway is that rules and hierarchy are not synonymous. I would add structure, rules, and hierarchy are not synonymous. All right. Thank you guys for the spirited conversation and all the contributions. Rondell, stirring the pot is what we do here. So the next time you come, bring your biggest spoon. All right.
Word.
All right. Bring your biggest spoon next time.
All right, guys, have a good night.
I don't know. We're going to pray. And then, or if you're going to leave, you can pray for us. Start to leave.
They're kind of fun. As we come before thy throne, we pray and we ask first and foremost for your forgiveness for sins. We pray, O God, that thou will have mercy upon us, O Lord, because we have done wickedly. We have not done according to your law and to your rules, and we pray and we ask for forgiveness. I pray for each and every family that is represented on this live and others. I pray that I will be with them and bless everyone. Be with us, help us to continue to delve into thy word and come up with truths. For these are the mercies I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Again, thank you, everyone. If you don't have a copy of the reading plan, go ahead, get one. Download it from the app. Water for the Thirsty. Just do a quick Google, Apple Store, Google Play, or you could check on the website, download the PDF, or hit us up info@waterforthethirsty.com, and we could send you a hard copy. We're every first and third Friday at 8. As you can see, we have 2 more spots there. So if you want to join the conversation, you don't even have to be in your house. You could be in your car and drive at the same time while you're doing it. You're welcome to come on and join us if you'd like to be a part of the conversation. Just hit me at info@waterforthethirsty.com or on Facebook or whatever, and we'll try to make sure you get a link so you could do that. We'd love to have additional perspective and voices. So thank you, everyone, for your time. And until the next time we meet, which would be the first Friday in March, drink up.
Drink up.